Welcome to Advanced TV Herstory. I'm your host, Cynthia Bemis Abrams. This is the place where we will connect the dots of TV and women to American culture and politics. If you like what you hear, subscribe to us on most podcatchers, as well as YouTube, Spotify, and Pandora. And if you would like to know more about what goes on behind the scenes of this podcast, subscribe to our e-newsletter, which can be done at tvherstory.com. Now, as you know, I'm not one to ask questions that I cannot answer, but here is one for the ages. Where would TV be today without Oprah Winfrey? When I say I don't have the answer, it's because I believe her work behind the scenes for the last 40 years or so has translated into people and ideas and products and change, some of which we don't really know the backstory of. What we do know, as of 2023, is that she's authored books, she's produced numerous really important historic TV interviews, specials, films, podcast episodes. She's got her own TV network. She's the force behind a powerful book club who can make or break an author. And she's published that incredibly luscious magazine, which was in print up until 2020. So as of 2023, she's reportedly worth between $2 and $3 billion. You go, Oprah. But back in 1989, Oprah Winfrey produced and starred in the two-part TV miniseries, The Women of Brewster Place. That was just a few years after the start of her daily TV show, which originated out of Chicago, and just years after she had earned an Oscar nomination for her role as Sophie in the film The Color Purple. The Women of Brewster Place was adapted from Gloria Naylor's 1982 debut novel, which earned Naylor the National Book Award in the first novel category. Recently, I watched the miniseries and then read the book, and I gotta say, Oprah honored Gloria Naylor's work by adhering to the plot with tremendous diligence, but also by putting in so many subtle details that Naylor had included in the book, and Oprah put them right on the screen. It was a lot of respect. Now, The Women of Brewster Place is available on DVD and YouTube, and it's appropriate for classroom viewing for ages 12 and older. But for you, adult listener, I highly recommend it. Before I tell you what impressed me, without revealing spoilers, I need to first confess and then digress. When my Advanced TV Herstory production calendar moved some topics around for this year, I found that this one, Oprah, and this miniseries, Brewster Place, were the furthest along in terms of research. But on a self-imposed deadline, I just didn't have the energy to draft this script. Here's the digression part. Audio wizard for this podcast, Mary Lou Morose, also serves as a sounding board for the podcast's production, administration, and promotion. I sent her a sniveling note saying that I just didn't feel like writing about Oprah and asked whether she had any thoughts about an idea that I put forth. She replied that while she liked that other idea, just for the heck of it, she utilized ChatGPT to see what artificial intelligence would produce about Oprah and the Women of Brewster Place. And here's what was spit out from ChatGPT.
As I watched Women of Brewster Place, I couldn't help but wonder about the influence Oprah had on the film adaptation of Gloria Naylor's novel. It's no secret that Oprah has been a strong advocate for women's rights and the feminist movement, and her involvement in this film only reaffirms her dedication to these causes. The film explores the lives of several African American women living in a deteriorating housing project known as Brewster Place. Each character represents unique challenges faced by women, especially those of color, in a patriarchal society. Maddie Michael, for example, has to navigate through the challenges of being a single parent to her son, while also dealing with the stigma attached to her unmarried status. As I watched Maddie's story unfold, I couldn't help but think about how she represented the struggles of many women in society today, the pressures to be the perfect mother, wife, and career woman, all while dealing with societal expectations, can be overwhelming. Other characters in the film, like Lorraine and Coralie, are prime examples of how women's identities are often defined by their relationships and how they are viewed by others. Lorraine's affair with a married man secretly eats away at her, while Coralie's promiscuity is the result of her feeling unwanted and unloved. But beyond these struggles, the film also highlights the resilience and strength of these women. They form a sisterhood, standing together in their moments of triumph and tragedy. Their solidarity provides them with the strength to overcome the barriers society has set up for them.
Well. Okay, so this is 2023 artificial intelligence. I wonder what that same query will generate in a few years from now. After 8 years of podcasting, is Cynthia's wisdom and vast knowledge of all things TV slated for obsolescence? More seriously, I feel for every teacher or supervisor at all levels and subject matters who may very well receive this in lieu of a real work product. I won't go into detail, but I will say that ChatGPT performed a somewhat accurate review of the plot and only negligibly connected it to Oprah's extensive biography of supporting women and projects that promote the work of people of color. All of Oprah's work. There's a lot out there. So, because you're listening to this podcast and this is my original work, I'm going to give you my 10 cents about the miniseries and why you should watch it. First, the cast is A-list, circa 1989, and it appeared like they had a lot of fun performing the light and the heavy scenes. Oprah assembled Cicely Tyson, Robin Gibbons, Jack Hay, Olivia Cole, Lynn Whitfield, Mary Alice, and Paul Winfield, just to name a few. And quite honestly, they all look like they could have taken these roles into arcs and touching moments for years to come. Second, this is interesting. Well, the ratings indicate that 35 to 37 million folks tuned in over those 2 nights. And yet the Chicago Tribune's TV critic sort of panned it, was not really impressed, and made a point of calling Oprah pre-diet Winfrey. In 1989, if you're old enough to remember, Oprah was known as much for her fluctuating weight loss as she was for the power she was building behind the scenes and the guests she was bringing onto her daily show. And interestingly enough, because the Women of Brewster Place is considered a hallmark, a classic TV miniseries, 30 years later, a writer for Vulture online magazine took a look back at the groundbreaking presence of lesbian characters. In 1989, Harpo Productions was emerging as a major economic engine in Chicago and was one of the few production companies really trying to put these messages out there at a time when there were other forces at work to keep these kinds of shows from coming on the network. And so People magazine in 1989, this is actually before the Women of Brewster Place had hit the air, Oprah admitted to People magazine that it was all a lot of hard work. By the time she'd started pushing Brewster Place, the idea had already been turned down by all 3 networks. Quote, "They said it was too womanish," says Winfrey, who went to see ABC executives herself with 5 copies of the book in her bag. Quote, "I passed them around and said, look, I know you are very wise and perceptive men, and the only reason you've turned down this project is because you haven't read the book. You could not read it and turn it down. I'll be calling by Tuesday to see who's read it. We're going to have a book report, fellas," she concluded. People magazine goes on to say that only one wise, perceptive executive had read the book by the deadline, but he was sold. Winfrey says, "We went from there." Now, as a contextual reminder, Oprah said this in 1988, and later in that year, the presidential election was the first George Bush beating Mike Dukakis with 79% of the Electoral College vote and 7 million popular votes. The first George Bush, read my lips, no new taxes, kinder, gentler, and 3 years later would nominate Clarence Thomas to the Supreme Court. Yeah, that was the world Oprah was running in. But 37 million viewers? Wow, that says a lot. That says a lot about where America was in 1989. Third point I want to raise. It was nominated for an Emmy in the Outstanding Miniseries, but lost out to War and Remembrance in that category. And even with a stunning ensemble cast, it was only Paula Kelly to earn the Supporting Actress in a Limited Series nomination. And the Emmy ultimately went to Colleen Dewhurst, a phenomenal force, for her work in the miniseries Those She Left Behind. However, it did earn the NAACP Image Awards and GLAAD Media Awards for the best miniseries that year. So, recognized by other constituencies other than their peers. Fourth and last, and I can say all of this without divulging too much about the plot. I'll simply say that it's set in the 50s and 60s and is about a neighborhood which is diminished when a brick wall is erected to facilitate car traffic. While in 1988, I can hear policymakers, male policymakers, saying, "Oh, we have to do it. It's tough luck. These are hard choices, but the needs of the community, the needs of commerce, the needs of the region are all more important. Tough luck. I hate making this vote." I can hear this. We call these actions, made by layer upon layer of governmental bodies, systemic racism. That's it. That's the show. That's what Oprah gave us while she herself was still acting and testing her chops as a producer. She was freezing this moment brought to us by Gloria Naylor in time. It's not often that you get to really see entertainment productions dealing with the outcome of systemic racism that isn't attached to violence. It's just attached to a diminished quality of life when neighborhoods were razed, when neighborhoods were divided. So ChatGPT will never make these connections. I could post this entire script to the internet, and I don't know that ChatGPT is ever going to find my scripts. If ChatGPT only scours what is written as history, then the stories of men, written by men, usually the victors in situations, will be perpetuated in greater detail and depth by artificial intelligence. There's just more out there. There are more books, there are more articles, there are more magazines. There is so much more in every encyclopedia, especially that old encyclopedia that was sitting on your family room's bookshelf that has only been added to over the years. So I guess for now, the humans, still smarter, but tick-tock, we got to get working on building out the archives and online resources of women's history. If Oprah isn't enough inspiration, take heart of this boots-on-the-ground story that was reported by Vice online in late 2022, and the link is in the show notes. A 34-year-old Jessica Wade, British scientist whose day job is at the Imperial College in London. And what does she do in her evening and off hours? Well, as of late 2022, she had created more than 1,700 Wikipedia entries about women of science. As Arman Khan of Vice wrote about Wade's efforts, and I quote, "It bears mentioning that the scientists Wade writes about are not relegated to obscurity within the science community. They have won medals, their works have been widely cited in important research papers, and in some cases, they've even had streets named after them. Yet the supposedly democratic and widely accessible world of Wikipedia was oblivious to the contributions of these brilliant women." End quote. Speaking as someone who uses Wikipedia as a standard source of information, I too have found it woefully lacking at times, particularly around information about women, background about women. In the series I produced a few years ago about Carol Stabile's book, Broadcast 41, which was all about how blacklisting ended the careers of talented women in the 50s. These were women who could have changed TV at the time that it was just emerging. People were experimenting. There was a lot of opportunity. And these women had their careers pulled out from under them literally overnight. And you know what? Many of those Wikipedia entries about those women were as sanitized as a CSI crime scene, if they were even remembered. Listeners, there is a lot of work to be done. So with that, I send you out to the world to keep telling the stories, keep working to lift others, and please keep sharing this podcast. Simply put, we don't have to be Oprah to have impact, and yet we also can't rely on ChatGPT to replace the wisdom and the knowledge and the stories that have yet to make it to the internet. So that's why I podcast. My thanks to Mary Lou Morose for all her work behind the scenes, including that gentle motivational nudge of a few days ago, and for including the links from all the sources I cited in our show notes. Also know that our music comes from the talented Jazzer. It's called Take Me Higher and is found at freemusicarchive.org. Follow us on Instagram and Twitter, and if you want more than is ever shared on social media, sign up for our e-newsletter by visiting tvherstory.com. Thank you so much for listening. I'm your host, Cynthia Bemis Abrams.